What up, and welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. We just finished up a live stream, and we're going back to back to record this third chapter of Deadhouse Gates. So let's get into it. All right, so this is actually going to be my last individual chapter video, unless the actual plot calls for it. But it's just taken too long to work through the books, and I'm definitely in it for the long haul. But when I started adding up all the chapters, I realized it was going to be like 5.5 years until I just get through the main 10. So I'm going to start batching them together, longer videos that hopefully you guys can either take in chunks or watch the whole thing in one shot or whatever, but that will at least just help us get through, and I'll just kind of group them together as dictated by the plot, essentially. Same rules as usual apply, so we'll keep it non-spoilery or just, focused on the summary slash reaction to the chapter, and then at the end I'll let you know when to jump out if we decide to speculate on stuff that happens down the road. All right, so chapter 3 opens up, and we're essentially at the Odotarl mines in the mining camp, which is named Skull Cup, with Fellison, Hiboric, and Bowden. The town is essentially run by this guy named Benneth, who's basically like the king of the slaves, if you will, or the king of the prisoners, and kind of rules over, at the behest, obviously, of the people who actually work for the Empire to kind of keep the slave population in order. We have Fellison, who's essentially using like the only currency she has to trade with at this point, which is herself, to kind of get some creature comforts as a slave in this Odotarl mining camp. And we found out she was doing this on the boat up, or on the ship up to the mines as well. After they left Unta, she was kind of sleeping with all the different guards on the ship to get privileges for herself and for Hiboric and Bowden, who Bowden has basically become her kind of default protector, essentially, at this point in the book. And I know, super controversial, and people hate Fellison for sure, and I totally get that. But you can see she's like, part of her is this like spoiled brat that's been ingrained into her growing up in a noble household, and the other part is kind of like almost out of body conscious of these deep fundamental flaws, and tries to kind of correct for them in weird ways, but is also just like cognizant of them at some level, even though she really can't stop herself from these kind of negative behaviors. And I think I mentioned that in the last video with her interactions with Hiboric, or maybe I was just thinking them as I was reading it. And we see Hiboric essentially getting assigned like all these gnarly tasks of like carrying all this rock up out of the mines that they're mining for Odotarl. And the MO is that he's just basically being driven into the ground, and this is kind of part of the Empire's ultimate plot to finish him off, ship him off to the mines, and then work him to death. And so he thinks this is all kind of a premeditated plan to finish the job. He also talks a little bit about how he can sense that the Odotarl mines were actually created using magic, and that so much magic happened that it essentially melted the entire island where these Odotarl mines are. He actually talks about like how bad he really wants to study the mines as well. Yeah, just an interesting piece of info. File that away for later on. But ultimately, it's just like a pretty depressing and brutal place of essentially slave labor. We hear that there's some kind of talk about rebellion or kind of overthrowing the guards and stuff, but there doesn't seem to be much there. We do see Diker talking to Fellison and telling her to kind of be on the lookout for changes in the seasons and like changes so that he knows what happens with the lake and the tide. So it does seem like on at least some level, he's kind of keyed in to Diker's plan to ultimately send Culp or somebody after him in hopes of rescue. But obviously, with all of the heads that are on spikes everywhere around Skull Cup, it definitely seems like that's a fairly dubious proposition. And so I think, at least from Fellison's standpoint, she's, thinking like, in the meantime, I'm going to get us as much creature comforts as I can. And so again, just super cozied up to Benneth, who's like the king of the slaves. We see Pella, the guard, when they first show up, is definitely trying to holler at Fellison. We get some internal monologue from Heboric as well, and he's super bitter at Tavor for essentially turning her sister into a whore. And he's having a pretty tough time of it too, because in addition to just like beating him into the ground with work, they're like actually literally whipping him up. Luckily his tats from Fenner, his boar tats, are kind of helping him to heal quickly, but he's having a pretty rough go. And we see Fellison, who's just essentially like, numbing herself to reality. She is hitting that Durang like a mug. Back up. She's drinking all the time. She's calling Heboric a hypocrite for like criticizing her for essentially turning into or for selling her body. And she kind of has her own internal monologue where she kind of, again, realizes that she's being a total B to Heboric. She doesn't know why she's doing it. She knows why she's doing it, but she can't like stop herself. But she does seem like conscious of it at some level. And she actually wants to, like, it seems like, be nice to him, but she just like can't bring herself to kind of stop the negative reactionary behavior, or just like, again, I think it's this defense mechanism is the only way she's able to process like this gnarly trauma. And it's just like super sad, right? Because like Heboric and Bowden are kind of at this point her only ties that she has to this person that she used to be. And so in a way they're like very important to her, even as she's like not able to be nice to him and just treats him like total garbage outwardly. And again, just super sad.
Hello darkness, my old friend.
Then we head back over to Seven Cities, and we see that Culp has essentially agreed to be part of this Heboric rescue mission. We also see that right as the fleet leaves, that the Red Blades show up, right? The Malazan fleet's out of there, headed back to Aaron, and the Red Blades are coming in, and it looks like they're looking to clean up the streets, quote unquote, again, as they did in Unta and in Erlatan that we saw with Fiddler. So they're essentially there to take out some of their angry aggression on their own little kinfolk. But ultimately the Wiccans jump in and kind of stop them from cracking down, having this big old violent crackdown on the mob in the market. And somehow Coltane like had all of his troops there undercover and is able to kind of defuse the situation. And I think ultimately the Red Blades are super scared, because they pretty much bluster for a second, but fairly quickly decide to boogie out.
Bye, Felicia.
And so this chapter is cool again, because we keep getting like these glimpses of just like how much smarter Coltane is, and actually very strategic he is, than especially what people give him credit for, but just also in absolute terms. And we actually see this as well because he's doing a lot of troop preparations, and so he kind of has his own Wiccans playing the kind of Seven Cities rebellion against the Malazan forces that are there, again, to kind of whip them into shape and get them all prepped for this coming battle. And they're doing all kinds of this kind of guerrilla warfare training, like in city streets, etc. And he is just like running them through the ringer. They are struggling. Everybody's tired. They're hurting. But ultimately, I think that the idea is that they're really preparing to have to escort like all of these Malazan refugees, because ultimately, the Malazan fleet led by Pormqual slash really Malik Rel, it seems like, have just straight up, abandoned Hisar, and you still have all these like Malazan, non Seven Cities kind of natives there who are ultimately going to be under the gun when this rebellion eventually kicks off. And so Diker actually recognizes that, again, Coltaine actually has this figured out, and that, they're doing all these guerrilla warfare preparations essentially to be on kind of refugee detail to get these Meslas from Hisar all the way back overland to Aaron. And so he actually goes up to Culpin and tells him what's going on, or doesn't tell him, but says, play ball essentially and get these troops to step up. But at the same time, he also goes over and kind of lobbies Coltaine for lenience on the troops, but ultimately they do step up and kind of show some real grit and salt. The Malazan troops do, and impress the Wiccans such that the Lancers step up to defend them. So they were just waiting for them to kind of stop bitching and moaning and really step up to the plate and show some grit. And once they did, they kind of stepped up to the plate to help them against the rest of the Wiccans who were pretending to be the enemy, and just gave this kind of really big sense of like group cohesion, and that they're kind of getting together as a real fighting force, as like a unified fighting force. And like even Coltaine jumps in to like help them out and shows some actual pride in them once they do it. And like Culp kind of shows his leadership skills as well. And so all around just, really cool scene. And so from Coltaine's standpoint, like this was all just like a big test to get them to show their actual mettle. So yeah, Coltaine, just what a G.
Got him!
Then we jump over to Fiddler, and this is actually a really interesting bit that I never really appreciated in the first couple times I read the book, but kind of appreciate it now, because Fiddler and Callum have obviously been scrapping over this kind of book of Drajna, which Callum's basically taking into the desert to deliver to Sheikh, and essentially use that to get passage through to Quan, where they're going to try and catch a ship. Fiddler doesn't think they need to do that, and there's this like weird dynamic where Fiddler's beef is like very specifically with Lassine, and feels like betrayed and obviously screwed over for the bridge burners and everything else, but still has a lot of like loyalty to the Empire as a whole, and wants to like see it continue just under new leadership, like a Dujek or a Whiskey Jack or something like that, I'm assuming. Whereas Callum is kind of this Seven Cities native, and he has this, it feels like, competing loyalties, because he's been cast out by Lassine, and he's going to take down the Emperor or the Empress of the Empire, and therefore, like, does it really matter anymore? And like, he's kind of then willing to aid and abet the enemy by delivering this book into Sheikh to start the Whirlwind Rebellion. And so and they obviously have argued about that, and it's just a really interesting distinction and like kind of a finer point where Fiddler still does have this deep connection to the Empire and still feels Malazan, and Callum's kind of like, dude, we're taking down the Empress anyway. What does it matter? It's not our problem. Dujek and Whiskey Jack are off doing their own thing. They're not going to be part of it regardless. And wouldn't it be nice to kind of give the FU to the Empire as we're taking it down, right? Like spit in the eye. Crocus actually calls him out and says, look, this is all kind of a bit hypocritical, right? Since we're using the rebellion to kind of make our way to Aaron to catch a ship. And apparently, even though Callum's going through the desert, they're taking some sketchier, more magical way. So we're going to have to find out what's up with that. Especially because Fiddler's like, yeah, and the path might not even exist. The other thing that Crocus actually accuses Fiddler of is like being super shady and not rushing immediately back to get Sari back to her dad, and instead keeping her around just in case Callum's plan doesn't work. Then they can send Apsalar in to finish the job on Lysine. But the crazy part is that Fiddler actually admits it.
Bruh.
But he ultimately says it's like Callum's idea, and it's just kind of an extreme backup plan. And so Fiddler's back in costume as a Grawl, and they're going to disguise themselves as basically pilgrims and a bodyguard who are on their pilgrimage to see like each one of the 7 holy cities of the Falad. The Red Blades show up, and they're obviously like on the hunt for Callum, right? Because Ten Beralta was there when he took the book, and Mebra double crossed and all of that good stuff. They're obviously looking for him, and Fiddler, I think, doesn't realize it, but he punks him anyway. But he's super sketched out just to, like, about everything that they're going to run into. They have like the Den Robbie that was heading towards this convergence. They've got Red Blades who are obviously on the hunt for stuff. There's this rebellion brewing. Callum's out there with the whirlwind stuff, and so it's just like brewing to be a pretty tense flight over land. And then he's also got this kind of shell that's invested with all this power from Kimlock, which sketches him out as well, because that could like bring down unwanted attention, just having such like a powerful object with him too. Okay, and then lastly we jump over to the shadow temple of Iskarol Pust, and he is being his classic self and doing his whole kind of like internal monologue out loud. And let me know down in the comments, do you think he's conscious that he's doing it out loud and doing it as like a tactic of manipulation? Is he just crazy? Let me know. He definitely seems to take after his patron in that way, personality wise, so they are definitely peas in a pod. It's also like mad degrading to Trells about how they're like super illiterate and all this stuff right in front of Mappo, and he's like, actually Trells are pretty literate. He has this like really weird sense of time, or doesn't have any sense of time at all. He just talks about how everything he's doing is all just preparations. Preparations for what? We don't know. He gives us like famous instructions on how to get to the library, and that would be like again a killer animated video idea that I want to try and get produced at some point. But apparently, and again I think, you know, hopefully I haven't spoiled this for you yet, but there's, you know, obviously a lot more to meets the eye when it comes to Iskarol Pust, right? Because he has like all these rare books and knowledge that, you know, this is stuff even Ikariam doesn't know about or hasn't seen before. And so one of the questions I have, and this isn't the spoilery part yet, so even the noobs, I want you to weigh in on this as well, is like, you know, in Wheel of Time, like the very first age is supposed to be our own modern world time, and then the Wheel of Time's taking place like many, many millennia down the road. Do you think a similar thing is happening with Malazan Book of the Fallen? Because these books are all on like ridiculously esoteric topics like seed growing and all this stuff that seems like they're actually like biology textbooks or something like that are just like very specific nerdy information like that we have to the nth degree in today's world, because people are so specialized that maybe this is like a clue that these are like all ancient texts from so like our own time. I don't think so. I just throw that out there as kind of a crazy fun idea to think about, but I'm guessing that Genebacchus didn't used to be like North Africa or something like that, but could be wrong. Let me know. But it also like reminds Mappo of this time a long time ago where he was summoned to this meeting with all these mages who essentially assigned him to his task, which he's since been carrying out, to watch over Ikariam. And so he's like avoiding talking about all these ancient books from millennia ago. And again, just this huge secrecy about keeping Ikariam from understanding his past. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, give it that thumbs up. Consider subscribing. Join the Facebook. Join the Discord. Hit us up over on the Reddit. I created a Teespring, so if you want merch, you can get some of that, or I made a Patreon as well, so you can always check that out too. But more than anything else, thank you for watching, and happy reading.